I'm Robin Corey. Kristen Galvan is my daughter. Kristen was 15 years old when she disappeared on January 2nd, 2020 in Montgomery County, Texas. She was visiting her grandmother, and she is originally from Houston, Texas, born and raised. Growing up, she was just the light of the world. She'd walk into any room, and she kind of looked like Shirley Temple, if you will, with those little curls and just natural bounce. She loved Elvis. She'd go and dress up just like Elvis and do I'm all shook up. She was definitely a character. Kristen has 2 little brothers, and she loves her brothers so much. Kristen is passionate about her family, her friends, but Kristen's father has not been in the picture since she was 3 years old. Charles came into Kristen's life when she was 10 years old.
I'm Charles Corey. I am Kristen Galvan's stepfather. She was just really playful, laughed a lot. You know, just kids that age, they don't have a lot of worries. Kristen always had a smile on her face, for sure.
Kristen was gifted and talented since 3rd grade. She loved to sing. She had a voice of an angel. And we had a very strict schedule in our family. You know, school, Girl Scouts, some sort of sport activity, home.
In the mornings, you know, my wife would, cook breakfast, and we'd have pancakes. And it would just be that good energy of just, hey, what's your plans for the day? Kiki, I call her Kiki. She loved school. When she was younger, but high school was when it started kind of going downhill.
At the end of freshman year, she did start to act kind of different, more and more pulled back from the family. So in 2019, when Kristen started her sophomore year, Kristen did have a shift change in her friends. And that's when Kristen began to skip class.
It just seemed like typical teenage behavior. She started getting involved with the wrong people, you know what I mean? She started acting out, being on her phone a lot and doing stuff on her phone.
She'd skip school, and I said, Kristen, give me your phone. You cannot have social media without me having the passwords. And I began pulling apart her Instagram messages. It was people in her high school, but older. These boys just seemed like a bunch of gangsters. And these were new friendships full of empty promises. Literally, hey, we'll buy you a Louis Vuitton bag. I just thought it was a really, bad boyfriend. And we needed to get her away from him.
Robin had found some stuff on the phone that she wasn't going to put up with, and confronted her about it. And it was a big fight over the phone.
November 1st of 2019, we woke up, she was gone. There was a note from Kristen saying that she was going to make her own way. Don't look for her.
Well, from the letter, she was saying she wants to go get money, and that this is what she wants to do, and, she's going to handle it and all this, and talking all this jive talk. She was 15 years old. She shouldn't be doing that.
So I started calling her phone. Of course, I was blocked. I went to log into her social media, and her passwords had changed. And I'm calling the police. The cop said she's a runaway. She'll come back home.
They literally didn't do anything. It makes you feel terrible because you can't do anything, hopeless.
When I saw that note, I almost knew somebody was in her ear. I had it in my gut. It was a complete nightmare. I was scared. After a week and a half, my phone starts ringing. It was Houston Police Department, and he said, are you Robin, mother of Kristen? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, we have her. And he said, we picked her up on Bissonnet Street. And I'm thinking, picked her up on Bissonnet Street? And he said, well, ma'am, we'll talk about that later. We want you to meet us at Texas Children's Hospital. I go to Texas Children's Hospital, and there's police officers. And then I see my daughter. Kristen's just in tears, bruised, pale. Her hair wasn't brushed. She had nails out to about here. And she also had $4,000 cash on her. And that's when the police officer said, "We think she's been trafficked."
My name is Caitlin Monty. I was a local journalist and news anchor in Houston, and I was the first person to cover Kristen Galvan's case. Houston has a huge black eye called Bissonnet Street. People refer to it as the Blade. It's essentially Houston's red light district. Easily, any given night, you could see anywhere from 10 to several dozen young women and men who are out on the street. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people being trafficked. Human trafficking is when young men and young women are sold for sex or sex acts, usually by a group of men. Houston police picked Kristen up on Bissonnet when they recognized that she was clearly a minor and not able to be consenting to performing sex work.
Finding out that Kristen was on Bissonnet was devastating, crushing. That kind of evil lurks out there. We're talking murders, prostitution, everything.
By the end of the hospital trip, as a mother, I'm thinking, do I bring her home with me? We decided it best her to go live with my parents. It was up in, Montgomery County in the Woodlands.
Montgomery County is 40 miles outside of Houston and considered a really safe and appealing area, particularly for families. So it's very reasonable that that would be a much better place for someone like Kristen to go, particularly if you knew that there was issues related to her having anything to do or any ties to Bissonnet.
So when Kristen, went to my mom's house, it's an hour and a half away. I was still calling her every day, and I was still going pretty much every day to go see her. I had to keep Kristen away from her brothers because I don't want them to see all this drama. It took her a couple weeks to really start to come forth, but she later opened up and told me everything. Kristen said her boyfriend told her to write a nice, lovely note. It was all planned. Her boyfriend would buy her bags, but she said it turned dark so quick, Mom. She said he drove me out there on Bissonnet Street, and Kristen said she had to sleep with 20 guys a day. If you didn't have that money, it was hell to pay. She's like, Mom, what they did to me was wrong. I really thought he loved me.
Traffickers use what's called the Romeo effect, which is sort of a romantic relationship. It doesn't start off as a threat. And then it's not until you get too deep that you realize, I can't get out of this.
Before she went missing, Kristen claimed this boy as her boyfriend. And he told her, hey, I'm gonna buy you the world. You're so beautiful. You're gorgeous. You deserve the world. I'm gonna give you the world. Flattering her and kind of grooming her to believe this. And I just didn't hit it at the time. I knew he was bad. Every red flag was there.
She literally said, you do not know what these people did to me. You have no clue what these people did to me. She wasn't the same person, in her eyes.
She'd wake up shaking, crying, sweating. This kid was sweating profusely, screaming with her nightmares.
These guys have really gotten her head, basically like brainwashing.
So we called Vice, we called HPD, and they came down, got more statements. We gave them the phone. I believed that these detectives were doing the best of their ability to get these traffickers so this wouldn't happen again or to anybody else. I had no clue what was about to come. The psychiatry appointments began pretty quickly. We started therapy, and she finally began to write in her journal. She started to feel better about herself. You could see kind of, the light coming back into her eyes, and she was visiting with her brothers more, and she was making so much progress. So Christmas time was good. Kristen was planning to go back to school in January to a different school, of course, and to get back into school, she needed a phone. So we thought it was time to, maybe it's time for you to have your phone back. and we were monitoring her on it. You know, it was in the kitchen. She couldn't have it at all at night.
I was 100% nervous about giving her the phone back because she was highly influenced.
January 1st of 2020. We were at my mom's house. We had had our New Year's meal, and it seemed like a pretty, normal day. She seemed okay. So I was planning on coming back the next day and seeing her. My dad woke up the next day and she was gone. Kristen did not leave any notes this time. Kristen did not leave any indication of anything. She was just gone. How am I gonna find my daughter? My baby's missing, and I'm panicking. And what do I do as a parent? Kristen took her phone with her. We tried to call Kristen's phone, but I was blocked.
We only had her for like a month and a half, and she's gone again.
When she was rescued that first time, she was scared for her life. She was so persistent. She's like, y'all don't understand. I have to go. They're going to kill you all. They know where you live. They know where Grandma lives. Mom, I have to go.
Once you are tapped by this dark underworld of human trafficking and sex trafficking, it is hard to get away from this network. This is not just one pimp who comes, meets you, and takes you down to Bissonnet. These individuals work for essentially a mob, and that network is very powerful and terrifying, and so it is really hard to feel safe again. And many young women and men who get pulled into sex trafficking will return to it over and over because they don't see any way out, and they're threatened that their families and their loved ones could be harmed if they were to leave or do anything that would impact the business. When Kristen went missing the second time, Kristen's boyfriend was in custody. So he insists he has no idea what happened. But it is easy for the sex trafficking ring to put a new pimp in place when you arrest one. So it's possible that Kristen was lured back by someone within her boyfriend's sex trafficking network.
Of course she was scared. Of course she's upset. She's a little tiny girl. She's a little girl. She don't know anything else. She was lured and brainwashed. And when you're a young girl like that, you're influenceable. You go off like what people tell you. And if you're being led this way, I mean, that's the way you're gonna go. I couldn't believe that the police didn't offer her protection.
I was scared that Kristen was lured back to these men because she got her phone back.
It's estimated that trafficking victims can be recovered by their traffickers as many as 7 times because they have an investment in you.
Kristen was coerced. Kristen was lured. Kristen was groomed.
She might have left the house because she wanted to protect her family. She might have left the house because she was lured out by the same psychological tricks that lured her the first time. We don't know. We don't know why she left the house, but we know that she has not been seen since.
I was scared. So we reported her immediately missing. I did make that flyer, but the police wrote her off as a runaway. Kristen did not run away. She was abducted and taken, period.
She's a young 15-year-old girl that has just been sexually assaulted by multiple men, and you have evidence of this. Like, why wouldn't you take action?
I mean, the logical thing to do would be go to Bissonnet, right? So I'm trying to figure out this, that, and get police to move. That's when I'm like, I'm gonna go there myself. January 3rd of 2020 was the first time I actually went to Bissonnet Street. What is a middle-aged soccer mom who clearly looks like a mom, doing on Bissonnet with a big red Jeep? You got people watching you. I go down there with a bulletproof vest. I was even paying homeless people out there to be my lookout.
That's Mama Bear. We'd go out there and she'd make me drive over and over again, around and around and around the streets, the strip, to try to find her. And she wasn't there. You see half-naked girls, you see cops not doing anything, and you see a long line of cars just waiting to have one of these girls get into their car.
I was showing the convenience stores, hey, have you seen her? Can I put her picture up? Nobody would let me put her picture up at all in that area. Nobody. This is organized crime at its finest. And they were all scared. Like, I would show them Kristen's picture, oh, you're in some deep like, this is the stuff I got from people in that area.
At this point, Kristen had been missing for a year. The police definitely need to be doing more or anything. We're literally casing out the place, you know. We're trying to take it in our own hands because we call law enforcement, the feds, FBI. We call everybody. Nobody helps us. Nobody cares. Unless it's your own daughter, nobody cares.
It's just the lack of response and return phone calls of our local law enforcement, our officials, and people I need to speak to. It's appalling. These people avoid me like I'm a plague. And the silence is deafening. And so that's when I found Betty.
My name is Betty Simons. I'm a private investigator, and I became involved in Kristen's case in early 2021 after Robin reached out to me. I've made it my life work to help victims of sex trafficking because it hits close home to me. My sister was sex trafficked at 14 years old, and eventually it led to her murder. I'm able to keep her memory alive by helping girls who are victims of this horrible crime. I've actually recovered 46 missing and exploited children. Somebody has to step up and somebody has to help these children. Our law enforcement is very understaffed. There's only 7 detectives in HPD for missing people. You're talking over 8,000 people reported missing a year and only 7 detectives to work it. When I first learned about Kristen's disappearance, my first initial gut reaction is, what have the police done? Who's the detective in charge? What is going on? Do we have any leads, or is there any which way we're kind of going on this case? What are the cops saying? What is law enforcement saying? I personally had talked to somebody in HPD that I trust and I have a good relationship with, and when I asked him what's going on with the Kristen Galvan case, his response was, who?
And I began to give Betty everything I had. And she began to really help me put some pieces together, finally, that law enforcement should have been doing. And I made Justice for Kristen. It's a Facebook group.
So once I got Kristen's case, I'm hitting social media. I'm looking through online ads. I am following these known traffickers and their girls and trying to see if I can just get a glimpse of Kristen. There are hundreds of escort websites, and so what we've learned is how to kind of limit those down.
It's estimated around 300,000 ads are placed every single day, so no one could go through all of those. But there are softwares like Traffic Jam that are able to use AI to scan all of these ads and all over the internet to figure out not only where are these ads being placed, but whose face is in them. Through technology like this, we have a better chance of getting through more of them and hopefully identifying more young women and young men who may be being advertised and sold.
In February of 2021, I actually sat down and had a meeting with a trusted source I had in Houston Police Department. And so I gave him Kristen's picture and he said, let me help. And just 2 days later, they had a hit on Traffic Jam, which they believe could have been Kristen.
I know every freckle on my daughter's body. I know every birthmark. And then I look at the face that the Houston DA sent me, and my heart dropped. And they also sent me another photo of her hands. And so the hands looked like hers. I was like, that's Kristen. That's Kristen. Where is she? We gotta go get her. So that was taken in Atlanta, Georgia, and Kristen was being sold for $10,000 per night. And so at that point, that's when Kristen's case became a FBI case. Because now we have evidence that she has crossed state lines. but I'm still gonna go there myself. And so on February 8th of 2021, I flew to Atlanta. And you know, each huge city has a Bissonnet. And Atlanta's very dangerous. And I'm thinking, we're gonna find her in Atlanta. This is it.
When we got the hit for traffic jam, we saw that 2 other young girls were in the ads with Kristen. As Robin's in Georgia, I'm back home in Houston, really trying to locate the other 2 girls and figure out who they really were, their names, and doing the research on that back end.
So I'm in Atlanta. We're passing out flyers. I'm talking to everybody. And they claim they just didn't have any idea who that was. And they're pretty much pleading the fifth on it.
I was able to talk to both girls in the ads with Kristen via FaceTime, and I showed them Kristen's picture, and they said, yeah, she looks a lot like her, but that's not her. And so they showed me the other girl's social media, and the resemblance was so similar, but it wasn't Kristen.
I talked to Betty, and I come back to Houston in tears. Getting on that plane, going from Georgia to Houston, I was just completely heartbroken.
Even though you have these softwares that are extremely accurate and very beneficial, they're not 100%. And so if somebody has a similar facial feature or hair, it may pick up as being that individual or that victim, and it's unfortunately just not. Right now, we're actually headed to what we call the Bissonnet track, or the Blade, as they call it. Usually out here, you'll see on average 25 to 35 trafficking victims that typically work this Blade and this particular track. They're living out of hotels, and so they're able to move around at the drop of a dime. So we'll see the same girls for, a couple of months, and then next thing you know, they'll move over into Vegas, and then they'll go, into Florida. And so they kind of make their way around the U.S. They are traveling a lot. And then, we won't see them for several months, and then they'll come back around and we'll see them back in Houston. And so we have to keep looking for Kristen.
On April 24th of 2021, I receive a tip on Facebook from a Latasha Robinson here in Houston, saying that Kristen is locked up in a house here in Houston. So Latasha was trafficked and she escaped. And this woman literally tells me things about my daughter nobody else knew. She knew Kristen sang. And that she had the most amazing voice.
She gave us addresses and very detailed information. And so as the information's coming in, it seemed extremely credible.
Latasha Robinson said that there was 4 girls locked in this house here in Houston. They were all pregnant. Kristen is pregnant. Latasha Robinson said that if the girls tried to run, they would kill their families. She gave me the location of this house. I looked up the house, and it had burglar bars on the inside and outside, just like she described.
And so we decided to actually go and watch this address that we thought Kristen was being trafficked out of. At that point, we set up surveillance. We ran approximately 12 hours worth of surveillance on the residence. During our surveillance, we didn't see any kind of activity that would indicate that a trafficking ring was going on there. There was no out of the ordinary vehicles coming and going. There's nothing really out of the ordinary. And so as we continued that investigation, we eventually learned that a small family was residing in the home. And so there was no trafficking going on. So at that point, my suspicions start rising. I really want to look into this Latasha and who she is and where her claims are coming from. And so I began to investigate her personally. I quickly found out that Latasha unfortunately did have an addiction problem, that the person she was claiming was Kristen and her trafficker is actually an ex-husband of hers.
Who's gonna make up, hey, your baby's over here locked up in a house? There's gotta be something mentally wrong if you do that.
In my experience as a private investigator, I think Latasha's motive could have been anywhere from a revenge and unfortunately using an innocent family like Robin to get her revenge on an ex-boyfriend. I don't feel like she was in it for any kind of a money or financial gain, but I do believe it was just a ploy.
The FBI has issued warnings about the level of scams that families of missing persons get subjected to. It's unfortunately far too common.
It makes you feel relief at first. Like, thank God she wasn't chained in this basement. Thank God this stuff wasn't real. You know, it really does. It gives you relief that there's still hope, that she's still out there, and that she's okay.
It's devastating, and, a mother is desperate to find her child. And so she's going to hold on to any lead that comes in, but on an investigative standpoint, we have no choice but to drop that and move on. I think being a private investigator, that's the hardest part of the job, is having to see that devastation in a family's face and watch them break down time and time again, tip after tip. Kristen's case is literally the most challenging case I've ever worked.
So June 1st, I get a Facebook Messenger message from Kristen saying, "Mom, it's me. I need you to go get my baby. They made me dump him in a porta potty. He is a Hispanic baby. Mom, please go get your grandbaby."
Maybe Latasha was telling the truth about Kristen's pregnancy after all, because it's totally reasonable that someone who's being sex trafficked might be forced to get rid of the baby, even if the baby had been born healthy and full term.
And then I immediately did a simple Google search, and this news article had come up that there was a newborn found in a porta potty in Houston. It was a complete nightmare. I was a mess.
Kristen Galvan was last seen January 2nd, 2020. If you have any information, please contact the Houston FBI at 713-693-5000.
When I saw that dead baby found in a porta potty in Houston, it was crazy. Here I am again, calling FBI because feds don't mess with that kind of stuff.
Breaking news out of Northeast Harris County. That's where deputies say they found the body of a deceased newborn inside a porta potty.
So FBI steps in and they're gonna come do a DNA swab. So this is my first time doing DNA on what could possibly be Kristen's baby, my grandchild. And just that panic. And being there knowing there's a dead baby sitting in the medical examiner's office that could possibly be Kristen's.
But we're literally having to live this nightmare and go down there and wait for months. It takes months to get results for these kind of things.
DNA in this case takes so long because you are talking about a crime scene. This is a deceased infant, and so they have to make sure that they have followed every policy and protocol to make sure if anything is found that it is admissible in court.
August of 2021, FBI sent me a message and said that Latasha is the one who had sent those messages to me. I reached back out to Latasha. No response. And something in my gut said go to her profile, so I did. and Latasha had died.
I'm not 100% sure if she overdosed. Somebody said a brain aneurysm. There's been multiple stories. Eventually, I mean, she died. I do not believe it had anything to do with Kristen's case.
I've been lied to a lot. So up, really. And my baby's still missing. I received a message 5 months later from FBI saying that I was not Kristen's baby.
So at this point, we're at the 2-year mark now, and I'm still checking ads. It has become a nightly routine for the last 2 years, and that's to check ads every night, multiple different cities, our bigger trafficking hotspots. Nothing is hitting with Kristen. Could she still be trafficked? Well, no, because she's not being sold, so there's no advertisement going on. Kristen, at the end of the day, to these traffickers, were a product. She was a product to be sold, and if that product is not being advertised, then the likelihood of it being sold is pretty small. So at this point, I did not believe Kristen was being trafficked anymore.
The fact that Kristen's been missing this long, you can't rule out foul play at this point.
So with Kristen not being advertised, it begins to make me wonder, is there another avenue? Is it possible that Kristen is no longer with us? And, could she have been killed? This is a very dangerous industry. And so that, we start to theorize, like, maybe the reason we're not seeing Kristen is because Kristen's no longer with us. I chose not to share my thoughts with the family because I didn't know it to be a fact. Robin's not willing to give up, and so you got to start asking her questions. What did I miss? Is there something I'm overlooking? You're talking 2 years and nothing. So I really kind of start to theorize. What could have happened? Maybe we were looking at Kristen's case all wrong the whole time. I knew we had to go back to square one. Let's go back from the day she disappeared. What was the one key factor in Kristen's disappearance? The phone. When I first got involved, Robin sent me the cell phone records, but at that point, we're thinking Kristen was with the trafficker, and so she didn't have the phone anymore, and the phone wasn't relevant. That was the one key factor I overlooked because I was so focused on believing Kristen was still being sold. So I took the cell phone records. I started figuring out who Kristen was talking to after her disappearance. Where did these numbers belong? Who are they in relation to Kristen? And I realized that we had a couple of Johns on there. And Johns are overlooked by law enforcement.
John refers to someone who is purchasing sex acts from someone, when often from those who are too young to consent. So this person knows they're breaking the law.
We focus so much of our energy and our time on the pimps, and really what we've seen is it's the Johns that are more dangerous. It's the pimps that are manipulating and abusing these victims, but the Johns are the ones that are deadly. Because a pimp isn't gonna kill his money, right? Why would you kill your money? Even in Kristen's case, we had focused so hard on the traffickers, and not once did we ever turn and focus on these Johns. So we began to separate the cell phone records, and I backtracked the phone numbers. One in particular caught our attention. It was the very last person that Kristen ever talked to on that cell phone. And I think that's when it hit me that the answer may have been in front of us the whole time. There were several messages with a John, back and forth over a couple of day period that Kristen had been gone. And so we knew we at least had a timeline of who was the last person to have spoken to Kristen. And I was able to track down the John He was not very forthcoming with information. He seemed to have a lot to hide. And every time I would talk to him, his story would change again. And so that was very suspicious. And why would your story change? You know, it's not hard to remember the truth.
And so help me God, if this man did hurt my daughter, oh man, Houston will have hell to pay.
I recently handed all this information over to the FBI because Kristen's disappearance is an open investigation. But what I do know is whatever happened to Kristen, she does deserve justice.
So the case is still open, but it's been 3 years and not much has changed in terms of what we know about Kristen's disappearance. However, we know that before Kristen went missing, Kristen was working with police and wanted to help end what was happening.
Kristen is 19 years old now. Her birthday just passed. We went to the beach. Kristen loves the beach. She would always say, my favorite place is where the ocean meets the sky. And I'm like, yes, me too, baby, me too. So I went to the ocean. Then I released some balloons. We had supper there and just, you know, a good family day. But the just not knowing. I think it's been long enough. I need some answers. And I think he deserves some answers. You know, at this point, you know, I'm going to continue to go out there, help families, help them find their children, and continue fighting to expose what's going on here in Houston. It's not just my baby being sold.
My sister was actually trafficked out on Bissonnet. So she was 14 years old when she first met her trafficker, and she was recruited out of what we call Chimney Rock, which is a CPS facility right up the road. And we know that the last sighting of Kristen was actually right here too. And this street, this blade, this track right here is very significant to Kristen's story. This is where her traffickers trafficked her. This is where they sold her. This is where, you know, Kristen fell into this dark world of child exploitation and child sex slavery, literally right here. We don't know what happened to her, but we know it started here. We don't know why Kristen decided to leave her house the second time. Is Kristen alive? Kids don't just fall off the face of the planet. As long as there's some sliver of hope, I'm not willing to give up.
It's been 3.5 years, and we pray for her safe return. I believe Kiki is out there and that we will be reunited with her soon.
She's there, she's out there somewhere. Somebody knows something. Somebody has to speak. It just takes one person that knows the truth. And we know you're out there.
The snow was still falling when they found her. Not a gentle snowfall. Not the kind that makes postcards. This was Minnesota in January, sharp, blinding, relentless. The kind of cold that burns the inside of your lungs and freezes silence into something solid. Minneapolis. Year 2000. A new millennium. A city celebrating fresh beginnings. And in an alley just 3 blocks from the Mississippi River, beneath a flickering security light, and half buried in drifted snow, a body lay waiting to be discovered. She had been there for hours. Maybe longer. 23-year-old Laura Jensen was supposed to meet her sister for breakfast that morning. She never showed. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By noon, the worry turned sharp. By 3 in the afternoon, panic had teeth. By 5:42 p.m., a sanitation worker cutting through the alley made the call that would split the city open. Female. Young. Unresponsive. The first patrol officer on scene later said he noticed the stillness. Not the body. The stillness. Minneapolis is never truly silent. Traffic hums, wind moves, somewhere a train cries along the tracks. But in that alley, even the wind seemed to hesitate. Laura was lying on her side, one hand curled beneath her cheek, as if she'd simply fallen asleep in the snow. No obvious blood. No visible trauma. Her coat buttoned. Her purse still slung across her shoulder. That detail would haunt detectives for years. Because robberies leave chaos. Assaults leave signs. Violence makes noise. This looked staged. The headline hit by morning. Minneapolis woman found dead, foul play suspected. The community reeled. Laura wasn't reckless. She worked at a downtown marketing firm. Volunteered on weekends. No criminal ties. No known enemies. Friends described her the same way in every interview: steady, kind, careful. Careful. Which is why the timeline made no sense. She left work at 8:17 p.m. the night before. Security cameras showed her exiting the building alone. She waved to the doorman. Smiled. The footage ends with her pulling her scarf tighter against the wind. That was the last confirmed sighting. Her apartment was only a 10-minute walk away. But she never made it home. Detectives canvassed the route. Questioned bar owners. Pulled ATM logs. Checked bus surveillance. Nothing. No screams reported. No struggle heard. No witness stepping forward with a crucial detail. Then the medical examiner's report landed. Cause of death, undetermined. No stab wounds. No gunshot. No blunt force trauma. But there were subtle signs. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. Light bruising along the neck. Not enough to declare strangulation conclusively. Just enough to suggest something, or someone, had applied pressure. The autopsy also revealed something colder than the January air. Laura had alcohol in her system. Not an extreme amount. But enough to raise questions. Her co-workers insisted she hadn't gone out after work. Her sister swore she had planned a quiet night in. So where had she been for those missing hours? And who had she been with? The alley became a shrine within days. Flowers frozen in ice. Candles burning stubbornly against the wind. The city demanded answers. Police held a press conference. We believe this was not a random act. 4 words that turned neighbors into suspects overnight. Not random. Which meant intentional. Targeted. The investigation widened. Phone records were pulled. One call stood out, a 47-second incoming call at 9:03 p.m. from a prepaid cell phone. Unregistered. Purchased with cash. The call pinged off a tower near the river. After that, Laura's phone went dark. Detectives traced her final movements. A bartender at a small pub 2 blocks off her route remembered her. She had come in briefly. Alone. Ordered 1 drink. Checked her phone repeatedly. Left after 20 minutes. Waiting for someone. Security footage from inside the bar showed her glancing toward the door at 8:52 p.m. At 8:55, she smiled, not at the bartender. At someone entering. But the camera angle never captured who. The figure remained just outside the frame. A shadow in a doorway. That image, grainy, incomplete, became the defining symbol of the case. News stations replayed it for months. A woman smiling at someone we could not see. Then walking out into the cold beside them. Investigators enhanced the footage. Adjusted contrast. Slowed it down frame by frame. All they could determine, the person was slightly taller. Wearing a dark coat. Possibly male. Possibly not. Snow began to fall heavier around 9:20 p.m. That erased footprints. Buried tire tracks. Destroyed what could have been the most vital physical evidence. By the time her body was found, any trace of struggle had been swallowed by Minnesota winter. Weeks passed. Then months. The prepaid phone was a dead end. Purchased at a gas station in St. Paul. No cameras working that night. No Clark memory. Cash transaction. Detectives interviewed co-workers. Ex-boyfriends. Gym acquaintances. A former neighbor, who had once asked her out and been politely declined. Everyone had alibis. Everyone passed polygraphs. The case file thickened. The leads thinned. By summer, headlines shifted. Cold case fears in Laura Jensen mystery. The words families dread. Cold case. As if the temperature of the investigation mirrored the night she died. But it wasn't cold yet. Not officially. Detectives kept pushing. Then came the letter. Postmarked April 2001. No return address. 3 sentences typed on plain white paper. She wasn't supposed to die. It happened fast. I'm sorry. No signature. No fingerprints. DNA from the envelope flap yielded partial results, degraded, incomplete, unusable. The media exploded. Confession. Hoax. Guilty conscience cracking under pressure. Profilers suggested the writer knew details not released publicly, specifically, that there had been uncertainty around the cause of death. But that information had leaked quietly weeks earlier. Nothing definitive. The letter deepened the mystery, but solved nothing. Laura's parents moved from Minneapolis 2 years later. Couldn't walk past the alley. Couldn't sit in the same church pew without imagining her there. The city moved on. But the file remained open. Detective Mark Ellison refused to let it freeze over. A 19-year veteran of the Minneapolis PD, Ellison had worked homicides that bled red and loud. This one was different. This one whispered. He believed in patterns. Believed no crime exists in isolation. He started reviewing similar cases. In 1998, a woman found unconscious near the river. Survived. Claimed she'd felt dizzy after meeting someone for a drink. Toxicology inconclusive. In 2002, another young professional reported blacking out after leaving a bar downtown. No assault. Just memory loss. Ellison circled the reports. Highlighted similarities. But without solid forensic evidence tying them together, it was speculation. Years rolled forward. Technology changed. DNA science advanced. Storage rooms filled with aging evidence boxes that suddenly held new potential. In 2010, Laura's case was officially transferred to the Cold Case Unit. A label no family ever wants. The alley had been repaved. The bar renovated. Witnesses relocated. Memories blurred. But one thing hadn't changed. That shadow in the doorway. And the question that refused to die. Who was waiting for her that night? Because somewhere in Minneapolis, someone knew. Someone had watched snow cover their tracks. Someone had read those headlines and stayed silent. And as the city's skyline grew taller and shinier, as new residents moved into lofts near the river unaware of what happened there 20 years earlier, the silence remained. Heavy. Unbroken. Until the day it finally cracked. The silence didn't crack with a scream. It cracked with a database hit. 2 decades after Laura Jensen was found in that alley, her evidence box was pulled from storage under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant static. Minneapolis Cold Case Unit. Winter again. Fitting. Detectives joked about the timing, but nobody laughed for long. Because in 2020, the science was no longer what it had been in 2000. And what had once been too faint to matter was suddenly loud enough to hear. The envelope from the anonymous letter had been preserved. So had the swabs from Laura's fingernails. Back then, the DNA profile was partial, fragmented, degraded, dismissed as unusable. Now, analysts believed they could do more. They ran it again. The lab technician noticed first. A minor male profile embedded beneath Laura's DNA. Not strong. Not complete. But there. Hiding in the margins for 20 years. A foreign presence. Detective Ellison was retired by then, but when the call came, he answered on the first ring. He drove downtown in the same old sedan he'd had since 2003. He didn't speak on the way. Just listened. The new lead detective, Mara Castillo, laid it out carefully. The male DNA profile was insufficient for CODIS. No direct match in the criminal database. But genealogy testing had changed the landscape. Cases once buried were rising. Families traced. Names uncovered through distant relatives who never knew they were holding a key. It was controversial. It was meticulous. It was slow. But they had nothing else. The DNA was uploaded into a public genealogy database used by amateur ancestry enthusiasts. It took weeks. Then months. Then, one night in late November, a notification appeared. Partial familial match. Third cousin range. The name meant nothing at first. A man in Wisconsin, who had submitted his DNA years earlier to trace Scandinavian heritage. No criminal record. No ties to Minneapolis police files. But his family tree began to branch. Genealogists built it backward, sideways, upward. Great-grandparents. Great-uncles. Distant nephews. Names long buried in census archives and yellowing marriage certificates. One branch led back to Minneapolis. One branch ended with a name that made Detective Castillo lean back in her chair and stare at the ceiling. Daniel Hargrove. Age 44 in 2020. Age 24 in 2000. He had lived 6 blocks from the bar Laura visited that night. 6 blocks. In 2000, Daniel Hargrove had no record. No arrests. No violent history. College graduate. Temporary jobs. Moved frequently. Quiet. Too quiet. His old address placed him within walking distance of Laura's route home. And more unsettling, employment records showed he worked part-time at a print supply warehouse in 2001. Access to typewriters. Bulk paper. Envelopes. The anonymous letter resurfaced in everyone's minds. They dug deeper. Phone records from 2000 were nearly impossible to retrieve in full, but archived billing summaries revealed something strange. A prepaid phone purchased in St. Paul had activated using a tower ping within 2 miles of Hargrove's apartment the night before Laura died. Not proof, but proximity. Detectives began surveillance. Hargrove now lived in Duluth. Married. 2 children. Insurance adjuster. Little league coach. The kind of man neighbors described as reliable. Polite. Helpful during snowstorms. The kind of man no one suspects. They collected his discarded coffee cup from a public trash bin outside a hardware store. Standard procedure. Legal. Quiet. The DNA from the cup was strong. Clear. Complete. When the lab overlaid it against the male profile extracted from Laura's evidence, the room went still. It wasn't a perfect match. But it was close. Too close to ignore. Statistically significant. Investigators needed more. They pulled Hargrove's employment and housing history. In 1998, he'd lived near the Mississippi River. In 2002, near another downtown bar where a woman had reported blacking out after 1 drink. That report Ellison had once circled. Patterns. They interviewed him under the guise of reopening cold cases from the early 2000s. Hargrove agreed voluntarily. Calm. Cooperative. Almost curious. He remembered Laura's case vaguely, he said. Hard not to. It was everywhere back then. Did he know her? No. Had he ever been to that bar? Maybe once or twice. Did he own a prepaid phone in 2000? He didn't think so. His answers were measured. Unhurried. Not defensive. But when Detective Castillo mentioned the anonymous letter sent in 2001, something flickered. A pause half a second too long. People do strange things when they are scared, he said quietly. Scared of what? He smiled faintly. Of being blamed. The interview ended without arrest. Without confession. But the pressure tightened. A second, more advanced DNA extraction was performed on the original envelope seal using modern amplification methods. The results came back stronger. The match probability now leapt into the millions. Investigators obtained a warrant for a direct DNA sample. When officers arrived at Hargrove's home in early December, snow was falling again. Just like in 2000. Just like the night Laura died. He answered the door himself. No panic. No attempt to run. He provided the sample. Waited. The confirmation came days before Christmas. Definitive match. Daniel Hargrove's DNA was on the envelope sent months after Laura's death. And beneath her fingernails. The arrest warrant was signed on December 22, 2020. News broke before sunrise. Minneapolis 2000 cold case solved. Suspect arrested after 20 years. The headline detonated across the city. Reporters swarmed Duluth. Neighbors stood in shock as squad cars lined the street. Parents pulled children inside. Hargrove was led out in handcuffs, face pale but composed. No dramatic outburst. No shouted denial. Just silence. At the press conference, Detective Castillo's voice was steady. For 20 years, Laura Jensen's family waited for answers. Today, we believe we have them. But belief and proof are not the same. In interrogation, Hargrove shifted. He admitted to meeting Laura at the bar. Said they talked. Flirted. Walked outside together. He claimed she slipped on ice in the alley. Hit her head. Panicked. Tried to wake her. Couldn't. Said he was young. Afraid. Didn't call for help. But the medical examiner's reevaluation contradicted him. There was no cranial trauma consistent with a fatal fall. And what about the letter? I felt guilty, he said. I shouldn't have left her there. In the snow. But guilt is not an explanation for bruising around a neck. Prosecutors prepared for trial. Defense attorneys argued contamination. Degraded DNA. Coincidence amplified by modern science. The community split between relief and doubt. Because after 20 years, certainty is fragile. Memories fade. Witnesses forget. Evidence ages. The question returned, louder than ever. What really happened in that alley? Was it an accident spiraled into fear? Or something deliberate, controlled, intentional? As Hargrove sat in a county jail cell awaiting trial, winter settled again over Minneapolis. Snow-layered rooftops. Covered streets. Softened sound. But this time, the silence felt different. Not empty. Tense. Because for the first time in 2 decades, the case was no longer a whisper in a file drawer. It was alive. And the truth, whatever it was finally stepping into the light. The courtroom filled before sunrise. Not because Minneapolis hadn't seen murder trials before, it had, but because this one had waited 20 years to breathe. 20 years of headlines fading and resurfacing. 20 years of a family staring at an empty chair during holidays. 20 years of a shadow in a doorway replayed on local news. Now that shadow had a name. Daniel Hargrove sat at the defense table in a navy suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Thinner than he had been at arrest. Paler. His hair touched with gray at the temples. He looked like a man who coached soccer, filed insurance claims, paid taxes on time. He did not look like a headline. Minneapolis 2000 cold case, trial begins. Prosecutors opened without theatrics. They didn't need them. The weight of time did the work. They spoke of January 14, 2000. Of Laura Jensen leaving work at 8:17 p.m. Of the bar. Of the smile captured on grainy footage. Of a walk into the snow beside someone we could not see. Then they placed a blown-up still image before the jury, the shadow in the doorway. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor said, voice measured, that shadow belongs to the man sitting right there. Defense objected. Overruled. The jury leaned forward. The prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars: DNA, proximity, and behavior. The DNA first. An expert from the state crime lab explained the evolution of forensic testing. In 2000, partial profiles were often dismissed. In 2020, amplification techniques could recover minute fragments. She described how male DNA had been found beneath Laura's fingernails. How it matched Hargrove with astronomical probability. She spoke clinically. Calmly. But when she said the words, physical contact, during a struggle cannot be excluded, the air shifted. The defense rose slowly. Cannot be excluded, the attorney repeated. But not proven. He emphasized degradation. Possibility of transfer. The fact that Laura and Hargrove had been at the same bar. That casual contact could explain the presence. Then came the envelope. The anonymous letter from April 2001. She wasn't supposed to die. It happened fast. I'm sorry. The prosecution argued it was consciousness of guilt. The defense argued it was youthful panic, after hearing media speculation. Hargrove had admitted to writing it. That revelation had stunned investigators during pretrial motions. He'd maintained innocence of murder, but confessed to sending the letter. I felt responsible, he told detectives in a recorded interview played for the jury. I left her there. Left her there. The phrase echoed through the courtroom. But why leave? His story remained the same. They met at the bar. They walked. She slipped. Hit the ground. Unresponsive. He panicked. Thought she was dead. Ran. The prosecution dismantled it carefully. The medical examiner testified next. A re-examination of preserved tissue samples revealed subtle hemorrhaging in neck muscles consistent with manual compression. Not a fall. Pressure. Sustained. The defense countered, decomposition can distort findings. Petechiae are not exclusive to strangulation. There was no fractured hyoid bone. No definitive bruising pattern. Reasonable doubt. The phrase hovered like frost. Then came the bartender. Older now. Gray at the edges. He testified that Laura had seemed expectant that night. Nervous. Checking her phone. Did she appear frightened? The prosecutor asked. No, he said. She looked excited. And when shown a photo lineup that included a younger image of Hargrove, the bartender hesitated. I can't be certain, he admitted. It's been 20 years. The defense smiled faintly. Time is a weapon. Next, Detective Ellison took the stand. Retired. Voice steady but older. He described the alley. The stillness. The way the purse remained on Laura's shoulder. Robbers don't leave purses, he said. Unless they're not robbers, the defense replied. Ellison spoke of pattern recognition. Of 2 other reports involving women who blacked out after brief bar encounters near the river. No charges were ever filed in those cases. No DNA collected. Speculation, the defense insisted. But the jury listened. Then the prosecution revealed something new. During a search of Hargrove's old storage unit, long forgotten, contents boxed and dusty, investigators had found a disposable camera. Undeveloped. Expired film dated early 2000. The photos, when processed, showed nothing overtly violent. Landscapes. Random street shots. And one blurred image taken at night near the Mississippi River. A figure in a light-colored coat walking ahead. The timestamp placed it within weeks of Laura's death. The defense argued coincidence. Minneapolis has many light-colored coats in winter. But coincidence layered upon coincidence begins to feel deliberate. Hargrove chose to testify. Risky. Bold. He walked to the stand with measured steps. He admitted meeting Laura. Admitted flirting. Admitted wanting more than she did. She said she wasn't interested, he said quietly. We were walking. She slipped. I tried to help. Did you place your hands on her neck? The prosecutor asked. No. Did you squeeze? No. Did you watch her die? Silence. No, he repeated. Then why not call 911? His jaw tightened. Because I thought I'd be blamed. The courtroom absorbed that. Feared blame more than death. During cross-examination, cracks appeared. He couldn't explain why his DNA was beneath her fingernails unless she had clawed at him. He suggested accidental contact during the fall. He couldn't explain the neck hemorrhaging. Suggested flawed science. He couldn't explain why he had kept silent for 20 years beyond fear. I was young, he said again. I made a terrible decision. The prosecution's closing was simple. Fear does not compress a throat. Panic does not leave petechiae. And innocence does not write anonymous letters apologizing for death. The defense countered with uncertainty. With time. With erosion of memory. With the absence of a direct witness. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside, Minneapolis held its breath. Laura's parents sat hand in hand. Older now. Faces etched by 2 decades of waiting. On the third afternoon, the verdict came. Guilty. Second-degree murder. The word fell heavy. Hargrove did not react outwardly. No collapse. No tears. Just a long exhale, as if something inevitable had finally arrived. Sentencing followed weeks later. 40 years. Minneapolis 2000 cold case, justice after 2 decades. The headlines declared closure. But closure is a fragile concept. Because even with a conviction, questions lingered. What happened in those final seconds? Did anger flare? Was it control? Rejection? Accident turned force? The jury believed he had intentionally applied pressure. Believed fear came after. Laura's family spoke outside the courthouse. "We finally have answers," her sister said. But her voice trembled on the word finally. And as winter receded into spring, the alley near the river remained. Repaved. Brighter. Quieter. People walked past without knowing what once lay beneath snow there. Yet every January, someone still leaves flowers. Because even solved cases leave shadows. And sometimes the most haunting part isn't the mystery of who did it. It's knowing he walked free among them for 20 years. Smiling. Coaching Little League. Shoveling snow for neighbors. While the truth waited, patient as winter, beneath the surface. The sentencing did not end it. Not really. Because when the doors of the courtroom closed and the cameras drifted away, Minneapolis expected relief, a city exhaling after holding its breath for 2 decades. Instead, something else settled in. Unease. Daniel Hargrove was behind bars. 40 years. No parole for decades. The headlines called it justice. Commentators called it a triumph of modern DNA science. Podcasts labeled it the cold case that finally broke. But detectives don't sleep easily on celebration. Not when details don't align. Not when a solved case still whispers. Within weeks of the conviction, Detective Mara Castillo reopened the supplementary files, not publicly, not officially, but because instinct refused to quiet down. Something about Hargrove's version of events remained incomplete. Too clean in some places. Too blurred in others. He had admitted to meeting Laura. Admitted to writing the letter. Admitted to leaving her body in the snow. But he never fully admitted to killing her. And during sentencing, when given the chance to speak, he said something that ricocheted through the room. "I never meant for any of this. Not I killed her. Not I'm sorry for what I did. Just that. I never meant for any of this." Language matters. Castillo went back to the autopsy photos. Enhanced scans. New digital reconstructions. The bruising on Laura's neck was consistent with manual strangulation, yes, but light. Not the kind of crushing force often seen in rage killings. Controlled pressure. Brief. Enough. The petechiae in her eyes suggested airway restriction. But there was no defensive tearing in the skin. No broken nails. The DNA under her fingernails was present, but minimal. Had she truly fought? Or had she been weakened first? That thought reignited an old lead. Toxicology from 2000 had shown moderate alcohol levels. Nothing alarming. But testing methods then were not what they were now. Preserved blood samples still existed. Castillo requested reanalysis using expanded toxicology panels capable of detecting substances undetectable 20 years earlier. Weeks later, the lab called. Trace amounts. Benzodiazepine class compounds. Low concentration. Partially degraded. But detectable. Laura had more in her system than alcohol. The report did not prove she had been drugged deliberately. The levels were faint. Time and storage had eroded precision. But it aligned with something else. The 1998 report. The woman near the river who claimed sudden dizziness after one drink. The 2002 blackout case. Neither case had DNA preserved. Neither woman had identified a suspect. Hargrove had lived near both locations at the time. Castillo sat in her office staring at the pattern board. What if Laura had not slipped? What if she had staggered? What if the panic he described was not fear of blame, but fear of exposure? The prosecution had secured a conviction without introducing toxicology theory. They didn't need it. The jury had enough. But justice is not just conviction. It is understanding. Castillo arranged a prison interview. Hargrove agreed. The visiting room was sterile. Fluorescent. Glass between them. He looked thinner still. Prison had drained color from him. You won, he said softly as she sat down. This isn't about winning. She slid a folder across the table. Toxicology results. He didn't touch it. You were careful, she continued. Too careful for a spontaneous accident. Silence. We retested her blood. A flicker in his eyes. There. Gone in a second. You said she slipped. She did. You said you panicked. I did. Did you put something in her drink? His jaw tightened. No. You understand we can reopen related cases. A long pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders lowered. I didn't plan for her to die, he said. Not a denial. Not an admission. A deflection. Castillo leaned forward. But you planned something. His eyes met hers. And for the first time since arrest, there was no composure. No suburban calm. Just calculation. You can't prove that, he said quietly. The interview ended there. Back in Minneapolis, media caught wind of renewed inquiry. Headlines sharpened again. New questions in solved 2000 cold case. The public bristled. Wasn't this finished? Hadn't justice been served? Laura's family declined comment. They had endured enough. But detectives continued digging. Credit card statements from 1999 revealed Hargrove had purchased over-the-counter sleep aids multiple times. Not illegal. Not suspicious on its own. Yet combined with trace benzodiazepines, the pieces edged closer. They revisited the 1998 survivor. Now living out of state. She agreed to speak. I remember feeling heavy, she said over video call. Like my limbs didn't belong to me. Did she recognize Hargrove's photo? A long stare. I can't be sure, she whispered. But maybe. Memory after 20 years is fragile. Defense attorneys would shred it. Still, Castillo documented everything. Because sometimes justice is layered. Hargrove filed an appeal. Claimed over-reliance on advanced DNA interpretation. Argued prejudice due to media coverage. The appellate process began, slow, grinding. Meanwhile, winter returned again to Minneapolis. At the alley near the river, Someone left fresh flowers. No note. Snow-covered footprints within hours. Castillo stood there one evening after work, coat pulled tight against the cold. She imagined Laura walking, laughing, checking her phone, expecting a date. She imagined the moment dizziness set in. The confusion. The vulnerability. She imagined hands at her neck, not in fury, but in control. A test. A boundary crossed. Did he intend to silence her permanently? Or did he miscalculate the fragility of breath? In prison, Hargrove kept mostly to himself. No disciplinary infractions. No violent incidents. He read, exercised, wrote letters to his children. But one letter intercepted by prison staff raised alarms. You don't know the whole story, it read to an unnamed recipient. There are parts they'll never understand. Investigators requested access. He refused further interviews. The appeal hearing loomed. Legal analysts debated whether modern genealogical DNA should hold such weight. Civil liberties advocates warned of precedent. Others called it a revolution in justice. The case had shifted from tragedy to legal battleground. And yet, beneath all the argument, the core remained simple. A young woman left a bar in 2000. She never came home. A man walked beside her. Snow fell. Pressure was applied. Breath stopped. 20 years passed before science caught up to silence. But motive, that final piece, still hovered just out of reach. Control. Rejection. Experimentation. Escalation interrupted. In the end, the law required proof beyond reasonable doubt. It did not require full understanding. As Minneapolis moved forward, cranes reshaping the skyline, new bars opening where old ones closed, the river kept flowing. Indifferent. Cold. And somewhere inside a concrete prison cell, Daniel Hargrove stared at walls that did not answer questions. Because sometimes solving a case doesn't end the mystery. It just narrows it. And the most unsettling truth of all. For 20 years, the danger wasn't a faceless monster. It was a man who blended perfectly into the snowfall. Waiting. Watching. Calculating how much pressure it takes to make a voice disappear. The appeal did not bring fireworks. It brought paperwork. Thick stacks. Legal briefs stacked like bricks. Words instead of sirens. Arguments instead of snow. But behind every motion filed, behind every procedural objection, the same question pulsed quietly beneath the surface of Minneapolis. Did they truly understand what happened that night? Daniel Hargrove's attorneys attacked the conviction from every angle. They argued that genealogical DNA databases blurred the line between citizen and suspect. That partial degradation could distort interpretation. That the jury had been swayed by emotion, by the romance of cold case solved, rather than the precision of proof. But the appellate judges were not interested in romance. They were interested in procedure. And procedure had been followed. The conviction stood. The city expected that to be the final chapter. It wasn't. Because 3 months after the appeal failed, another envelope arrived at the Minneapolis Police Department. Plain white. No return address. Postmarked Duluth. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. You missed something. No signature. No apology. No explanation. The room went still when Castillo read it aloud. Handwriting analysis was irrelevant, it was typed. Fingerprints were smudged beyond clarity. But DNA swabs from the seal revealed only one profile. Daniel Hargrove. He had mailed it from prison through an intermediary, another inmate with male privileges. A calculated move. Not emotional. Deliberate. Castillo felt it then, not fear. Challenge. She returned to the original crime scene diagrams. Reconstructed measurements. Distance from bar to alley. Wind speed that night. Snowfall rate. Estimated body temperature decline. One detail resurfaced. Laura's purse. Still on her shoulder. Inside, everything intact, wallet, keys, phone. But there had been something small, almost dismissed at the time. Her phone battery had been removed. Not drained. Removed. In 2000, phones required manual extraction to access batteries. It wasn't something that fell out during a slip. It required intention. Why remove the battery if panic was immediate? Why disable the phone completely instead of simply fleeing? Castillo requested a re-interview. This time, no softness. No slow circling. When she entered the visitation room, Hargrove was already seated, hands folded neatly on the metal table. "You like puzzles," he said before she spoke. "I like answers." He tilted his head slightly. Studied her. "You think there's more." "I know there's more." A faint smile. She placed a photo on the table, the disassembled phone battery from 2000, preserved in evidence packaging. "Why take this out?" Silence. "You said you panicked." "People who panic don't dismantle electronics." His gaze didn't waver. "She wasn't breathing," he said. "That doesn't answer the question." Another pause. Then he leaned back. "She was going to call someone." "Who?" "I don't know." "That's not true." The silence this time stretched longer. Thicker. "She changed her mind," he said finally. "About what?" "About coming with me." There it was. Control. "She said she felt strange," he continued quietly. "Like the ground was moving." Castillo didn't blink. "What did you give her?" He exhaled slowly. "It was just something to relax her." "What?" He looked down at his hands. "I didn't think it would," he stopped. The sentence hung unfinished. "You didn't think it would what?" Castillo pressed. "Go that far." He never said kill. He never said choke. But the piece is locked. He had drugged her. She realized. She resisted. And in the struggle to prevent exposure, to prevent a call, a scream, a charge, he applied pressure. Just enough. Too much. The removal of the battery wasn't panic. It was containment. "You experimented before," Castillo said calmly. He didn't answer. But his silence was no longer empty. It was acknowledgement. "You wanted to see how much control you had," she continued. His jaw tightened. "You can't prove that. Maybe not in court. But you know it." His eyes hardened then, not with rage, not with grief. With calculation. "I never meant for her to die," he repeated. And this time, it sounded less like denial. And more like confession without the word. The new admission couldn't change the conviction. It strengthened it. But it revealed motive. Power. Control disguised as charm. A quiet predator testing boundaries. The department reopened the 1998 and 2002 incidents formally. Without preserved DNA, charges were unlikely. But statements were taken. Reports documented. Patterns archived. Because even if the law couldn't reach backward further, history could. The media caught wind again. Solved cold case reveals darker truth. Talk shows debated whether Hargrove had intended escalation. Criminologists analyzed behavioral patterns of non-violent appearing offenders. Commentators dissected the psychology of control killers who present as suburban normalcy. But none of that mattered to Laura's family. When Castillo met them privately and explained the new admission, Laura's sister sat perfectly still. She knew, she whispered. She must have known something was wrong. Castillo nodded. Yes. That knowledge hurt more than uncertainty ever had. Because it meant Laura's final moments were not confusion from a fall. They were realization. Fear sharpening. Trust collapsing. Snow falling. Hands tightening. Years later, flowers still appear in that alley every January. Not because the case is unsolved, but because resolution does not erase violence. It clarifies it. Daniel Hargrove will spend decades behind concrete walls. His children will grow up with a last name that carries weight. Minneapolis will remember the case as a triumph of forensic science. But beneath the official narrative, beneath cold case solved, there is a quieter truth. He didn't snap. He calculated. He removed a battery. He applied pressure. He walked away. And for 20 years, he lived as if winter had covered everything. Until technology thawed the silence. Until DNA spoke louder than memory. Until the shadow in the doorway finally stepped into the light. And even now, when snow falls over Minneapolis and the river moves dark beneath ice, the city remembers what it learned too late. Sometimes the most dangerous men are not loud. They are patient. They wait in doorways. They smile just outside the frame. And they count on the cold to hide what they've done. Winter returned again, but this time the cold felt earned. Minneapolis no longer whispered about a mystery. It spoke about a reckoning. The narrative had shifted from "who did it" to something far more unsettling. How many times did he try before? The reopened reports from 1998 and 2002 refused to stay quiet. One woman remembered dizziness after a single drink. Another remembered walking toward the river and feeling her legs turn to water. Both had survived. Both had woken up alone, disoriented, ashamed of something they could not fully explain. Neither had pressed charges. There had been no proof. No DNA preserved. No suspect identified. Now there was a name. Daniel Hargrove. In prison, he avoided the television room when coverage resurfaced. Other inmates watched the segments. Some recognized the pattern immediately. Control offender. Not rage. Not chaos. Precision. He received letters, some venomous, some curious, some disturbingly admiring. He answered none of them. But one interview request he accepted. A forensic psychologist contracted by the State Corrections Department requested evaluation following his post-conviction statements. Standard procedure, officially. Unofficially, the department wanted clarity. Risk assessment. Pattern identification. The evaluation room was smaller than the visitation chamber. No glass barrier. Just a table bolted to the floor and two plastic chairs. Dr. Helen Ward did not begin with accusations. She began with silence. He filled it. "They think I planned everything," he said. "Didn't you?" she asked calmly. He studied her carefully. "I planned to meet someone," he replied. "That's not illegal." "No. I planned to impress her." "With drugs?" A pause. It was mild. Without her knowledge. He didn't respond. Dr. Ward flipped through her notes. You've described feeling powerful when situations are controlled. I never said that. You implied it. Silence again. The moment she said she felt strange, Ward continued, What did you feel? He exhaled slowly. I felt ahead. Ahead. Not panicked. Not frightened. Ahead. And when she tried to leave, his jaw flexed. She overreacted. By wanting to go home. She said she'd call someone. And that threatened you. He didn't deny it. The evaluation report later described traits consistent with coercive control behavior. Not a classic serial predator. Not sadistic in the traditional sense. But fixated on dominance in subtle, escalating forms. Testing limits. Adjusting dosage. Observing reactions. Laura had not been the first test. She had been the final escalation. Back in Minneapolis, Detective Castillo faced another complication. Civil attorneys representing one of the earlier survivors filed a lawsuit against a now-defunct downtown bar, alleging negligent security practices from the late 1990s. The claim argued that staff failed to intervene when patrons appeared incapacitated. The lawsuit couldn't bring criminal charges against Hargrove for those incidents. Statutes of limitation barred that path. But it reopened public scrutiny. Old bartenders were interviewed. Former managers subpoenaed. Security policies dissected under modern standards. The city felt exposed, not just by one man's actions, but by how easily he had operated in plain sight. Minneapolis reckons with past failures, one headline read. Laura's case had begun as a cold mystery. It had evolved into a mirror. The alley itself changed. A small memorial plaque was installed discreetly near the site. Not dramatic. Not sensational. Just a name. Dates. A line chosen by her family. She deserved to come home. Simple. Unavoidable. Castillo visited again one evening after work. Snow drifted softly, but the air felt different than it had 20 years earlier. Not heavy with unknowns. Heavy with awareness. The psychological evaluation report reached the prosecutor's office weeks later. It included a final paragraph that lingered long after reading. Subject demonstrates remorse for consequences, but limited empathy for victim experience. Emotional response centers on loss of personal freedom rather than inflicted harm. Remorse for consequences. Not remorse for action. That distinction matters. In prison correspondence monitored by authorities, Hargrove wrote to a former colleague. They built a monster out of a mistake. But a mistake doesn't remove a phone battery. A mistake doesn't test chemical thresholds. A mistake doesn't write, she wasn't supposed to die. As months passed, interest gradually cooled. New crimes filled headlines. New tragedies displaced old ones. But in quiet corners, law enforcement seminars, forensic conferences, psychology lectures, the Minneapolis 2000 case became a study. Genealogical DNA's power. Behavioral escalation without prior arrests. The myth of he seemed so normal. Because he had seemed normal. Neighbors described him as helpful. Patient. Unremarkable. That was the point. Control offenders don't announce themselves. They practice in increments. They test reactions. They calibrate risk. And when one miscalculation leads to death, they adapt, or they bury it beneath routine. Until science exhumes it. Years later, when Laura's parents attended a victims' rights conference, they were asked what closure felt like. Her father answered slowly. "It feels quieter," he said. "But it doesn't feel finished. Because closure is not a door slamming shut. It is a gradual dimming of noise." Laura's sister sometimes still dreams of that night, not the violence, but the bar. The smile. The anticipation. The small human hope of meeting someone new at the edge of a new millennium. That's what lingers most. Not the courtroom. Not the DNA charts. But the ordinary beginning that turned fatal. Minneapolis learned something harsh in those years. Monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like young men with polite smiles. Sometimes they volunteer to be interviewed. Sometimes they sit calmly while evidence unfolds, confident that snow once covered everything. But snow melts. Technology advances. And patience, the same patience predators rely on, can belong to justice too. Daniel Hargrove will grow old behind walls that do not move. Seasons will pass without his permission. Control will narrow to routine, meal times, yard time, lights out. And every January, when snow falls across Minneapolis and settles quietly near the river, the city will remember the lesson written into its coldest case. Silence is not innocence. Charm is not safety. And sometimes the most dangerous pressure is the kind applied slowly, just enough to make a voice disappear before anyone hears it crack. By the seventh winter after his conviction, the case had settled into Minneapolis history, archived, cited, referenced in lectures about forensic breakthroughs and behavioral escalation. But history has a way of breathing again when least expected. It started with a storage room. Not in a police station. Not in a courthouse. In a suburban home outside St. Paul, where Daniel Hargrove's ex-wife finally decided to clear out the last of his boxed belongings from the garage rafters. The divorce had been quiet, procedural, inevitable after the conviction. She had refused interviews. Refused sympathy. Focused only on shielding her children from headlines. But boxes remain. Dust collects. And one Saturday afternoon, she pulled down a plastic bin she had not opened in years. Inside were old notebooks. College papers. Receipts. Manuals. And a small, unlabeled VHS tape. No date. No handwriting. Just black plastic and magnetic memory. She almost threw it away. Almost. Instead, curiosity won. The tape required an old player borrowed from a neighbor. The image flickered when it began, static, distortion, then resolution. Nighttime footage. Grainy. A street lamp near water. The Mississippi River. The timestamp burned in the lower corner, February 1999. The camera angle was low, partially obstructed, as if placed on a ledge or inside a parked vehicle. Footsteps approached. A woman's silhouette crossed the frame. She appeared unsteady. A male voice behind the camera whispered something unintelligible. The tape cut abruptly. No assault captured. No explicit crime. But the implication hung thick as winter air. She stopped the tape. Rewound it. Watched again. The voice, calm. Controlled. She knew that voice. Within 48 hours, the tape was in Detective Castillo's hands. The department moved carefully. Publicly, the case remained closed. Privately, the implications detonated. If Hargrove had recorded encounters before Laura, if he had documented experiments, then Laura's death was not escalation born of accident. It was the endpoint of rehearsal. The tape was digitized. Audio enhanced. The whispered words clarified. "You're okay. Just relax." The same phrase he had reportedly told Laura, according to his prison interview. "You're okay." The 1999 timestamp aligned with no known police reports from that date. No missing persons. No filed complaints. Which meant the woman on that tape might never have known how close she had come. Investigators cross-referenced unsolved disappearances from early 1999 within a 50-mile radius. Nothing conclusive. But absence does not equal innocence. Castillo arranged another prison visit. This time, there was no small talk. She placed a tablet on the metal table and pressed play. The grainy footage flickered between them. For the first time since his arrest, Daniel Hargrove's composure fractured. Not dramatically. Not with tears. But with stillness so rigid it felt like cracking ice. "That's not illegal," he said finally. "Recording someone incapacitated?" Castillo asked. She wasn't incapacitated. She could barely walk. She was drunk. Was she? Silence. "You kept trophies," Castillo continued evenly. "It's not a trophy. It's documentation." He looked away from the screen. It was curiosity. Curiosity about what? How people respond. To loss of control. To chemical interference. To suggestion. The psychologist's evaluation echoed in Castillo's mind, fixation on dominance in subtle, escalating forms. "You tested limits," she said quietly. "I stopped," he replied. "You got better at hiding it." The conversation ended without confession to additional crimes. There was no direct proof linking him to other deaths. No bodies. No preserved DNA. But the tape changed the story. Publicly, authorities announced the discovery carefully. Additional materials reviewed in Minneapolis 2000 case. They did not speculate. They did not accuse beyond evidence. But the community understood. The narrative shifted from cold case solved to something colder. Calculated experimentation over time. Laura had not simply encountered a man on one reckless night. She had crossed paths with someone who had been rehearsing. The 1998 survivor, upon seeing still frames from the tape released for identification purposes, contacted police again. "I remember that lamp post," she said. "I remember that angle of light." Memory sharpened under confirmation. Though legally insufficient to reopen criminal charges, the statements deepened the profile. Hargrove was not a spontaneous killer. He was iterative. Each encounter adjusted variables. Dosage. Location. Timing. Risk. Laura had resisted at the wrong moment. The phone battery removal now fit within that framework, not panic, but protocol. Disable communication. Control narrative. Leave no immediate trace. He had counted on shame to silence survivors. He had counted on snow to erase the rest. In prison, other inmates sensed the shift. A man convicted of an impulsive crime carries one reputation. A man revealed as methodical carries another. Hargrove requested protective custody weeks after the tape became public. Isolation. Reduced interaction. Reduced influence. Control shrinking. Meanwhile, Minneapolis wrestled with a new discomfort. How many predators operate quietly beneath routine? How many experiments never escalate far enough to make headlines? The city funded new bar safety initiatives. Awareness campaigns. Training programs to recognize signs of drink tampering and coercion. Laura's name became attached to legislation proposals, not dramatically, not exploitatively, but firmly. Her death reshaped policy. That is a different kind of justice. One evening, Laura's sister visited the river alone. The plaque remained small. Snow gathered around its edges. She stood there and imagined the timeline rewritten. If someone had intervened earlier. If one survivor had felt safe enough to push harder. If one bartender had noticed a pattern. If one man had not mistaken curiosity for entitlement. The wind carried across the frozen water, low and steady. The Mississippi does not hold memory. But cities do. And Minneapolis would remember this case not just as a solved mystery, but as exposure. Exposure of how charm can camouflage. How patience can masquerade as normalcy. How a shadow in a doorway can belong to someone who practices before he commits. Daniel Hargrove will likely never confess to more than what secured his conviction. He will maintain the language of accident. Of unintended consequence. Of youth and panic. But the tape exists. The pattern exists. And somewhere in the late 1990s, under another winter sky, another woman walked unsteadily beneath a street lamp and heard a calm voice say, "You're okay." She survived. Laura did not. That is the difference between rehearsal and fatal error. Snow fell again that January. Soft. Quiet. Covering nothing this time. Because what was buried in 2000 is no longer hidden. And the city that once asked who, now understands the far more disturbing question. How long? The tape did not give them another body. It gave them a timeline. And timelines change everything. For years, investigators had worked backward from January 14, 2000, from the alley, the snow, the bruising, the battery removed. Now they began moving forward from February 1999, from the street lamp by the river, from the whisper caught on magnetic tape. Rehearsal. Refinement. Escalation. The forensic team enhanced every frame of the VHS. Reflections in windows. License plate fragments. Audio artifacts buried beneath static. It was painstaking, almost obsessive work, the kind of labor reserved for cases that refuse to stay buried. In one frame, just 3 seconds long, a partial reflection appeared in the glass of a parked car. A shape behind the camera. The outline of a coat. A hand adjusting the lens. On that hand, a ring. Not a wedding band. A class ring. Investigators cross-referenced old photographs from Hargrove's college yearbooks. In multiple images from the late 1990s, he wore a distinctive signet-style ring on his right hand, square face, dark inset stone. The reflection matched. Not proof of another crime. But proof of presence. Castillo felt the pattern tightening like wire. They pulled financial records again, this time not just receipts for sleep aids, but hardware purchases. In late 1998 and early 1999, Hargrove had bought miniature camera equipment from a specialty electronics store that no longer existed. Mail order catalog. Paid in cash. The store's archived inventory records confirmed shipments of compact camcorders marketed as discrete recording devices. At the time, it had been a novelty market. Now it looked like preparation. The department convened a behavioral review panel, psychologists, criminologists, forensic analysts. Not to prosecute. That chapter was closed. But to map trajectory. The consensus was chilling in its simplicity. Hargrove displayed escalating experimentation with chemical incapacitation and situational dominance. Early encounters likely ended without lethal intent. Control was the objective. Observation was the reward. Laura represented a rupture, a subject who resisted strongly enough to threaten exposure. And in that rupture, pressure increased. Too far. Too long. Just enough. The panel's internal memo used a phrase that stayed with Castillo. Threshold miscalculation. Not rage. Not frenzy. Calculation. He had been measuring something invisible. How much a body could tolerate. How much silence could be preserved. How much risk he could carry without consequence. Laura disrupted the equation. Meanwhile, the public narrative grew darker. Podcasts re-examined the case. National outlets revisited the genealogy breakthrough that had first identified him. Commentators began using words like proto-serial behavior and experimental predator. The term unsettled people. Because serial killers are supposed to leave bodies. Hargrove left near misses. Until he didn't. In prison, protective custody isolated him from general population. A smaller unit. Limited interaction. No access to shared media without supervision. Control shrinking further. But isolation also removes distraction. And distraction had once shielded him. A prison counselor later reported that Hargrove had begun journaling extensively. Not about remorse. Not about Laura. About systems. He wrote about chemical thresholds in abstract language. About human response curves. About the illusion of consent when perception is altered. The journal was confiscated. Its tone was clinical. Detached. He still framed it as research. That was the most disturbing part. Not hatred. Not obsession with Laura specifically. Curiosity. The kind that views human beings as variables. Back in Minneapolis, a new tip surfaced after renewed media coverage. A woman in her 40s contacted police claiming she had once accepted a ride from a man matching Hargrove's description in 1997 after feeling dizzy outside a downtown bar. She remembered waking up at home with no memory of how she arrived. No assault. No physical harm. Just absence. She had never reported it. At the time, she assumed she'd overconsumed alcohol. Now she wasn't so sure. Without physical evidence, without contemporaneous reports, nothing criminal could be pursued. But the timeline extended further backward. 4 winters. 4 escalating experiments. Castillo stood again by the river one evening, the city skyline reflecting against black water. She tried to imagine the first time he tested the idea. The first drink altered. The first moment he watched someone sway, and felt that quiet internal surge of being ahead. It likely didn't begin with violence. It began with observation. Observation turned into adjustment. Adjustment into boldness. Boldness into fatal miscalculation. Laura's case forced Minneapolis to confront something uncomfortable. Predators don't always hunt for spectacle. Some hunt for control so subtle it hides beneath normal life. He dated. He worked. He attended holiday gatherings. All while refining technique. And the only reason the pattern surfaced at all was because one night, the dosage intersected with resistance. The wrong variable moved. The equation collapsed. The appellate courts closed his final avenue for relief in late 2026. Conviction affirmed. Sentence intact. The legal system declared it finished. But behavior analysis rarely feels finished. Dr. Ward, the forensic psychologist, later presented the case at a national conference. She avoided sensationalism. She focused on cognitive framing, How offenders with low overt aggression can rationalize experimentation as curiosity, detach from victim perspective, and escalate incrementally without self-identifying as violent. During the Q&A, someone asked, "Do you believe he would have killed again?" Ward paused. "I believe," she said carefully, "that escalation had not plateaued." The room went quiet. Because plateau implies stopping. And nothing in his documented trajectory suggested voluntary stopping. Laura had not ended his experimentation. Science had. DNA had. Time had. If genealogical databases had not evolved, if evidence had remained degraded beyond recovery, he might still be coaching Little League. Still adjusting dosage. Still standing in doorways just outside camera frames. That is the shadow that lingers. Not just what happened, but what might have continued. On the anniversary of Laura's death, a candlelight gathering formed near the alley. Not large. Not dramatic. Just neighbors, friends, strangers holding small flames against the cold. Her sister spoke briefly. She was excited that night, she said. She thought she was meeting someone kind. The simplicity of that hope is what cuts deepest. Not fear. Not recklessness. Just optimism. The snow fell lightly as people dispersed. No sirens. No mystery. Just memory. Daniel Hargrove will spend decades in controlled routine, the very thing he once manipulated now imposed upon him. Meals measured. Movement monitored. Interaction limited. No variables to adjust. No thresholds to test. No doorways to wait beside. And yet, the most haunting aspect of the Minneapolis 2000 case is not the conviction. It's the realization that evil does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it studies. Sometimes it rehearses. Sometimes it whispers, "You're okay," while calculating exactly how much control it holds. And sometimes, for years, it walks unnoticed through snowfall, blending perfectly into the ordinary, until one miscalculation leaves a body in an alley and a city forced to see what was always there, just outside the frame. By the 9th year after his conviction, the case had stopped being a headline and become a reference point. In law schools, it was cited as a landmark in genealogical DNA admissibility. In criminology seminars, it was dissected as a study in incremental escalation. In Minneapolis, it was simply remembered as Laura's case. But history doesn't sit still. It shifts when someone asks a new question. The new question came from an unlikely place. A graduate student at the University of Minnesota researching unsolved disappearances along the Mississippi Corridor between 1995 and 2005. Her thesis wasn't about Hargrove. It was about geographic clustering of late-night incidents near riverfront redevelopment zones. She mapped reported blackouts, assault complaints, missing persons reports, locations of bars, street lamp density, police patrol frequency. Patterns emerged. Subtle, but persistent. Several incidents between 1996 and 1999 fell within a 2-mile radius of where Hargrove had lived during those years. Individually, they meant nothing. Collectively, they suggested proximity. The student submitted her research to the department for review. It landed, eventually, on Castillo's desk. Castillo studied the map. Red dots near water. Near parking lots. Near dim transitional spaces between nightlife and residential quiet. The same kind of space where Laura had been found. It did not prove additional crimes. But it reframed geography. Hargrove hadn't hunted randomly. He had chosen liminal zones, places where noise fades, witnesses thin, and memory blurs. Transitional spaces. Between bar and home. Between laughter and silence. Between consent and confusion. The department quietly reopened cold files that fit the geographic profile. Many lacked physical evidence. Some victims had moved away. Some memories had degraded beyond usefulness. But one case resurfaced that made Castillo's pulse steady and slow. March 1999. A 26-year-old paralegal named Erin Caldwell had been reported missing after leaving a downtown pub near the river. Her car was found 2 days later in a public lot. No signs of struggle. No body ever recovered. At the time, investigators suspected voluntary disappearance or out-of-state relocation. Erin had recently ended a relationship. There were financial stresses. But now, mapped against Hargrove's residence and employment at that time, the overlap tightened. Erin had last been seen near the same street lamp captured in the VHS tape. Castillo reopened the file personally. No preserved biological evidence remained. No confirmed connection to Hargrove. But the behavioral markers aligned: late-night bar exit, proximity to river, sudden absence, no robbery. They interviewed Hargrove again, this time specifically about March 1999. He listened without visible reaction. "I've never heard that name," he said. "Were you near the river that week?" "I lived near the river for years." "Did you meet her?" "No." "Did you record her?" His eyes flickered at that. "No." The denial came faster than previous ones. Too fast. But speed is not evidence. Without physical proof, without a body, without preserved DNA, the case against him for Erin's disappearance remained circumstantial. Still, the question lodged like ice beneath skin. If Laura represented escalation interrupted, what if Erin represented escalation perfected? The possibility haunted investigators. The river complicated everything. The Mississippi is vast, deep, indifferent. It carries evidence beyond jurisdiction lines. Beyond state borders. Beyond recovery. Search teams in 1999 had scanned limited stretches. Technology then was crude compared to modern sonar mapping. In late autumn, the department authorized a targeted sonar survey along sections near the 1999 coordinates. Not because they had proof, but because unanswered patterns demand attention. The search took days. Cold wind. Gray water. Monitors glowing in patrol boats. Anomalies appeared: debris, scrap metal, submerged logs. And then one shape that did not match natural formations. Divers descended. The object was not human remains. It was a shopping cart tangled in sediment. False hope. False alarm. The river kept its secrets. When news of the renewed search leaked, media revived the narrative. Did Minneapolis predator claim more victims? The phrasing unsettled the city. Because predator implies series. Series implies numbers. And numbers imply scale. Laura's family declined public comment. Erin Caldwell's aging parents did not. "We just want to know," her mother said through tears. "Even if it's terrible. We just want to know." Knowing is sometimes worse. But not knowing corrodes slowly. In prison, Hargrove filed a grievance alleging harassment through repeated interviews about uncharged crimes. Legally, he had protection against coercive interrogation without new evidence. The warden restricted further questioning unless new forensic developments emerged. Which meant the investigation shifted back to cold data. Old receipts. Utility records. Traffic citations. Anything placing him near Erin's last known movements. One gas station receipt from March 18, 1999 placed his card purchase 3 blocks from the pub Erin had visited. 3 blocks. Not proof, but proximity. Castillo understood the limits. A prosecutor can build a theory. A jury requires certainty. And certainty erodes with time. Yet something in Hargrove's behavioral arc suggested unfinished chapters. The VHS tape proved rehearsal. Laura proved escalation. Erin represented ambiguity. In behavioral science, ambiguity is fertile ground. Dr. Ward revisited her evaluation notes. She highlighted a line from Hargrove's journal. Control is most effective when unrecognized. That sentence chilled her more than any overt admission could. Because if a subject never recognizes loss of control, she cannot report it accurately. If she cannot report it accurately, the offender refines method. And if refinement continues unchecked, fatal thresholds narrow. Laura recognized. Erin might not have had the chance. The sonar search concluded without recovery. The file on Erin Caldwell returned to open, active. Not solved. Not closed. Suspended in possibility. Minneapolis carried on, construction cranes, riverfront festivals, summer markets. The physical spaces once dim and transitional became brighter, more surveilled. More cameras. More lighting. More patrols. Laura's death had reshaped the environment. Perhaps too late for others. One evening, as autumn settled over the city, Castillo stood again at the riverbank. The water moved dark and steady beneath her. She thought about thresholds. About how much pressure it takes to stop breath. About how much silence it takes to bury suspicion. About how many near misses never surface. Daniel Hargrove may never face additional charges. He may never confess to anything beyond Laura. But patterns speak even when people do not. And the most unsettling part of the Minneapolis 2000 case is not just that it was solved. It's that solving it revealed how close the city may have come to something far worse. Because predators who rehearse rarely stop on their own. They stop when interrupted. By mistake. By science. Or by death. Laura was the interruption. The fatal miscalculation. The moment the experiment failed. And as long as the Mississippi keeps moving past those riverfront lights, there will always be one question carried beneath its surface. Was she the only one the snow couldn't hide? For decades, the boy had been a question mark. A grainy photograph. A small body in a box. A case file thick with frustration. But now, investigators weren't just looking at bones and evidence tags anymore. They were looking at a family tree, one that stretched quietly through generations, intersecting with a respected forensic organization known as the Doc Society, whose members had once pored over the mystery in private meetings, chasing ghosts long before technology caught up. The irony was not lost on anyone. For years, experts had speculated about abuse, about secrecy, about a household that had something to hide. And now, with genetic genealogy mapping bloodlines branch by branch, the outline of that household began to sharpen. Detectives retraced old addresses. They revisited faded property records. They reconstructed a timeline from fragments, utility bills, census entries, school district maps. The house. That house. The one rumored to have held a frightened child behind drawn curtains. The one neighbors barely remembered. It had changed hands. Renovated. Painted. Modernized. But foundations don't forget. Investigators now knew the boy had siblings. Some still living. Some gone. Relatives, who had grown up unaware that one branch of their family history ended in a cardboard box in winter. When authorities made discreet contact, reactions varied. Shock. Denial. Silence. No one had ever been told a child disappeared. No one remembered police at the door. No missing person posters pinned to refrigerators. Just an absence that had quietly folded into time. And that absence raised the most chilling possibility of all. What if the people responsible never reported him missing, because they knew exactly what had happened? There were no charges to file. The prime suspects had long since died. Time had protected them in a way it never protected their victim. But closure, even delayed, carries weight. When officials finally stood before cameras and spoke the boy's name aloud, not America's unknown child, not boy in the box, but a real name, something shifted. He was no longer evidence. He was a person. And with that shift came a different kind of reckoning, not in courtrooms, but in memory. Because while justice in the legal sense might never arrive, history had been corrected. The file would no longer be stamped unknown. It would carry a name. And names have power. They force us to confront what happened. They refuse to let stories dissolve into folklore. They remind us that every cold case is not just a mystery. It's a life interrupted. And sometimes, even after 65 years, the truth still finds its way home. The press conference was brief. Measured. Careful. Officials from the Philadelphia Police Department stood before a sea of microphones and cameras, announcing what had once seemed impossible. After more than 6 decades, the identity of the child known only as the boy in the box had been confirmed. Behind them, decades of frustration. Ahead of them, a community trying to process what that meant. The case had haunted Philadelphia since 1957. Generations of detectives inherited the same thick binder. Some retired before science could answer the questions that consumed their careers. Others passed the file along with quiet words, "Don't give up on him." And they hadn't. Through wars, political shifts, technological revolutions, the case remained open. It survived the transition from paper files to digital databases. It endured the skepticism of those who said it would never be solved. It even weathered false leads, including long-disputed claims published in books like The Murder Room, where theories circled but never fully landed. Then came the turning point: genetic genealogy. A science barely imaginable when the boy was found. Using advanced DNA extraction and cross-referencing distant relatives through public ancestry databases, forensic experts narrowed the search. Family branches were traced backward, sideways, forward again, until a single path aligned with records long buried in courthouse archives. The name emerged quietly at first. Then it was verified. Confirmed. Sealed with documentation that could withstand scrutiny. The announcement wasn't just about identity. It was about accountability to history. Citizens who had grown up hearing whispers about the unknown child felt something change. The mystery that once felt urban legend now felt personal. Real. Memorials that once bore no name would need updating. Newspaper archives would require correction. A symbol had become a son. Yet questions remained. How did he die? Who, exactly, failed him? And why had no one reported him missing? The answers may never fully surface. Those most directly connected are no longer alive to face interrogation. Time, relentless and impartial, had shielded them. But time had also preserved something else. Persistence. The investigators, who reopened the case in the 21st century, understood they weren't chasing headlines. They were fulfilling a promise made by predecessors decades earlier, that no victim, no matter how small, would be forgotten. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Not that evil can hide, but that sometimes it can hide in plain sight for years, until science, patience, and the quiet determination of strangers finally pull it into the light. The boy once found in a cardboard box now had a birth certificate, a family tree, and a place in recorded history. No longer an urban legend. No longer an unsolved file. Just a child, whose story, though tragic, would never again be anonymous. In the end, there was no dramatic arrest. No handcuffs. No courtroom confession. Only a name, spoken aloud in a quiet room, carried across microphones, and etched permanently into the historical record of Philadelphia. For nearly 70 years, the case had been known by a haunting nickname, the boy in the box. A symbol of unanswered questions. A reminder of how easily a child could vanish into obscurity. But in 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department confirmed what generations of detectives had chased. The child had a family, a lineage, and a birth name. Through advanced genetic genealogy, technology unimaginable in 1957, the fragments finally aligned. The cardboard box. The vacant lot. The winter air. All of it now belonged to someone specific. The revelation did not bring prosecution. The individuals believed to be responsible were long deceased. Legal justice, bound by time, had slipped away decades earlier. Yet something profound still happened. The file was closed, not as unsolved, but as identified. That distinction matters. Because anonymity is a second kind of erasure. For years, theories had swirled. Books were written. Documentaries produced. Online forums dissected every photograph and police sketch. One of the most widely discussed accounts appeared in The Murder Room, where experts revisited the mystery in painstaking detail. But even the most experienced profilers could not give the boy back his name. Science did. And in doing so, it changed the narrative from legend to life. The discovery also reignited a broader conversation about how many other cold cases wait quietly in archives across America. How many unidentified victims are just one technological leap away from recognition? How many families carry secrets that time alone cannot bury? The story of the boy in the box is no longer about mystery. It is about endurance. The endurance of investigators who refuse to discard an aging file. The endurance of forensic science pushing beyond old limitations. And the endurance of truth, which, even after decades, has a way of resurfacing. In the cold winter of 1957, a child was left alone in a box. In 2022, he was brought back into the light. No dramatic finale. No cinematic showdown. Just a name. And sometimes, after a lifetime of silence, that is the most powerful ending of all. When the cameras packed up and the press cycle moved on, something quieter remained. A gravesite. For decades, visitors had come to a small cemetery outside Philadelphia, leaving flowers and handwritten notes addressed simply to America's unknown child. Strangers who felt connected to a boy they had never met. Parents who couldn't shake the image. Detectives who stopped by on anniversaries. After the identification announcement by the Philadelphia Police Department, those visits changed. The headstone would no longer carry anonymity. A name would replace the question mark. And with that name came a shift in responsibility, from myth to memory. Cold cases often live in two worlds. One is procedural, evidence logs, lab reports, chain of custody forms. The other is emotional, community grief, public fascination, the uneasy awareness that someone got away with something. For this case, both worlds collided in the modern era of genetic genealogy. The same type of investigative technique that helped identify suspects in the Golden State Killer case decades later proved capable of solving mysteries even older. It signaled something larger than one solved file. It signaled that time is no longer the shield it once was. Across the country, evidence rooms are being reopened. Old bones re-examined. Hair fibers retested. Databases expand each year as more people upload DNA profiles, often unaware that a distant relative's sample could unlock a crime buried in history. But with progress comes complexity. Families who never knew a secret existed are suddenly confronted with one. Descendants must reconcile the idea that someone in their bloodline may have been capable of unspeakable harm. Communities must revisit uncomfortable truths long softened by distance. And investigators, many of them younger than the case itself, must balance compassion with objectivity. Because at the center of it all was not a symbol. Not a legend. But a child. A child who had once played, cried, laughed, before becoming evidence in one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Now, decades later, his identity has reshaped how the case is remembered. No longer defined by a cardboard box. No longer reduced to a nickname repeated in headlines. History corrected itself. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough to ensure that when future generations open the archives, they will not find a blank space where his name should be. They will find a record. A birth. A death. And a reminder that even the coldest cases can still breathe. The headlines may fade. But the echo of truth, once uncovered, never really disappears. Long after the press conferences ended, long after the headlines slipped beneath newer tragedies, one quiet truth remained. A child once lost to history had been found. In a modest cemetery outside Philadelphia, the grave that had drawn strangers for decades no longer marked an unknown. Where there had once been a symbol, there was now a son. A boy with a birth record. A lineage. A place in documented history. For investigators at the Philadelphia Police Department, the case became more than a solved mystery. It became a benchmark, proof that no file is ever truly beyond reach. Technology had done what time tried to prevent. Through advanced forensic genealogy, distant relatives were identified. Family trees reconstructed. Old hospital records re-examined. Each branch narrowed the search until the truth emerged, not dramatically, but methodically. And that methodical work changed everything. The case of the boy in the box had once symbolized failure, a reminder of how easily a vulnerable child could slip through every safety net. But now it symbolized persistence. The kind that spans generations of detectives, scientists, and advocates who refuse to let anonymity stand as the final word. Yet closure is a complicated thing. Legal justice never arrived. The individuals believed to be responsible were no longer alive to answer questions. Courtrooms remained empty. But moral justice, the restoration of identity, carried its own weight. In the broader world of cold cases, this resolution sent a message. Advances similar to those used in the Golden State Killer case investigation have reshaped what is possible. Cases once shelved as unsolvable are being reopened across the country. Evidence once considered too degraded is being tested again with modern precision. The past is no longer untouchable. And perhaps that is the true legacy of this story. Not the horror of how it began. Not even the decades of mystery. But the promise it leaves behind. That anonymity is temporary. That silence can be broken. That time, though powerful, is not absolute. Somewhere in 1957, a child was abandoned in the cold. In 2022, he was given back his name. And in that restoration lies a quiet vow, from every investigator, who ever opened a dusty file and refused to close it for good. No one is forgotten forever. In the archives of the Philadelphia Police Department, there is a difference between a case marked unsolved and one marked closed. For nearly 70 years, this file sat in the first category. Now, it rests in the second. That distinction may seem procedural, a stamp, a database update, a line changed in a system. But for the investigators, who carried the weight of the boy in the box through generations, it represents something far heavier. Completion. Not perfection. Not prosecution. But completion. In Philadelphia, the case had become folklore. Parents whispered about it. True crime writers revisited it. Amateur sleuths dissected grainy crime scene photos online, searching for overlooked clues. For decades, the mystery felt frozen in time, a permanent question mark hanging over the city's history. Then science intervened. The same evolving field of investigative genetic genealogy that once stunned the nation during the Golden State Killer case proved that even the oldest evidence can speak, if someone is willing to listen closely enough. And someone was. Detectives who weren't yet born when the child was found took ownership of the file. They re-examined preserved evidence with modern tools. They followed distant DNA matches across generations, constructing a family tree that finally intersected with a birth certificate. When the name surfaced, it did more than answer a question. It changed the emotional center of the story. The boy in the box was no longer a symbol of mystery. He was a child who had lived, however briefly. A life that intersected with schools, neighbors, relatives, people who may never have known how that story ended. There is no dramatic epilogue. No final suspect standing trial. The passage of time closed that door long ago. But something else opened. Across the country, cold case units took notice. Evidence rooms were revisited. Unidentified remains re-examined. Families of missing persons felt a cautious surge of hope. Because if a case buried in 1957 could yield its truth in the 21st century, what else might be possible? When the file was finally archived as closed, it was not sealed in silence. It was preserved as proof that persistence can outlast decades, that technology can rewrite what once seemed permanent, and that identity, no matter how delayed, still matters. A cardboard box once held a child the world did not know. Now, history does. And sometimes, that is the quiet victory that endures long after the sirens fade. Cold cases rarely end with applause. They end with paperwork. A final signature. A digital update. A box returned to a shelf, but this time, labeled differently. In Philadelphia, the case that once defined an era of unanswered questions now defines something else, possibility. For decades, the boy in the box represented investigative limits. He was the reminder detectives carried into retirement, the one that slipped away. The case referenced in classrooms, in briefings, in books, including examinations of historic investigations like the murder room, where experts dissected old mysteries searching for patterns that might unlock them. But patterns alone weren't enough. It took science catching up to sorrow. Through forensic genealogy, the same evolving discipline that reshaped modern criminal investigations nationwide, preserved DNA was re-examined with tools that simply did not exist in 1957. Distant relatives unknowingly became the missing bridge. A fragmented family history became a roadmap. And at the end of that roadmap was a name. The identification did not erase the horror of how the story began. It did not grant the courtroom reckoning many hoped for. Those who might have faced justice had already slipped beyond its reach. Yet the impact stretched far beyond one grave. At the Philadelphia Police Department, the resolution reinforced a cultural shift: no case is too old to matter. Evidence once considered exhausted can breathe again under modern analysis. Cold case units across the country cite this breakthrough as proof that time is no longer the impenetrable barrier it once was. For the public, the transformation was quieter, but just as profound. The nickname faded. The myth dissolved. In its place stood a child with documented existence, no longer a symbol, but a person restored to history. And perhaps that is the enduring lesson. Justice does not always arrive in handcuffs. Sometimes it arrives as recognition, as correction, as the simple but powerful act of saying someone's name aloud after decades of silence. The cardboard box is now an artifact of the past. The anonymity is gone. What remains is a legacy, not of mystery, but of perseverance. Because in the end, the story was never only about how a child died. It was about whether he would ever be remembered. Now, he will be. Every solved cold case casts a light forward. In Philadelphia, the identification of the boy in the box did more than close a chapter, it rewrote expectations. Detectives, who once inherited shelves of fading files, now see those shelves differently. Not as monuments to defeat, but as opportunities waiting for the right moment. Inside the cold case unit of the Philadelphia Police Department, the workflow has changed. Evidence once logged and stored is being recatalogued. Biological samples are prioritized. Old property receipts, handwritten notes, and archived interviews are digitized, searchable, cross-referenced with tools investigators of the 20th century could never have imagined. Because the lesson is clear. Time delays justice. It does not erase it. Across the country, similar breakthroughs have followed the path carved by genetic genealogy, the same evolving science that transformed the investigation into the Golden State Killer case. Each success reinforces a new reality: anonymity is fragile in the age of DNA databases. But progress carries ethical weight. As more cold cases are reopened, families long removed from past crimes may suddenly find themselves connected to them. Descendants learn uncomfortable truths. Communities revisit tragedies they believed safely buried. Truth, when it resurfaces, does not ask permission. And yet, for victims who were once unidentified, that truth is everything. The boy in the box is no longer a cautionary tale whispered in true crime circles. He is a documented life. A corrected record. A reminder that institutions can evolve, and that persistence, when paired with science, can outlast generations. Future investigators studying this case will see more than a tragic crime. They will see a timeline of progress, from handwritten police logs to digital genealogy mapping spanning continents. They will see proof that cases thought impossible can move. And somewhere, in evidence rooms and labs across America, other forgotten names wait for their turn. The story that began in winter silence now echoes forward as promise. Not every cold case will end this way. But some will. And for the first time in decades, that possibility feels real. Even after identification, even after the file is marked closed, a certain silence lingers. In Philadelphia, the story no longer dominates headlines. The press vans are gone. The microphones packed away. The case that once defined mystery has shifted into memory. But silence does not mean absence. It means reflection. Inside the halls of the Philadelphia Police Department, the file now serves as a quiet case study, a reminder to younger detectives that patience can outlast doubt. That breakthroughs are often born not from dramatic revelations, but from steady, methodical work across decades. The evidence in this case survived time. Carefully preserved. Properly logged. Protected long enough for science to catch up. That preservation made the difference. Because in the modern era of investigative genealogy, the same revolution that reshaped cases like the Golden State Killer case, the smallest biological fragment can carry generational answers. But not all questions were answered. How did his final hours unfold? Who, precisely, made the choice that ended his life? Did anyone hesitate? Those answers likely dissolved with the people who held them. And that is the hardest truth of all. Identification brings dignity. It does not always bring full closure. Yet dignity matters. For decades, the boy was reduced to a nickname, a headline shorthand that stripped him of individuality. Now, future textbooks, articles, and documentaries will tell the story differently. Not as an anonymous symbol, but as a child restored to history. And perhaps that restoration is its own form of justice. Because crime steals many things: safety, trust, sometimes life itself. But anonymity should not be one of them. As years pass, new cold cases will rise to national attention. New mysteries will capture public imagination. But beneath them all lies a precedent: no case is beyond reconsideration. Somewhere in a quiet archive room, a once-forgotten file now rests not as a question, but as an answer. A name reclaimed. A record corrected. And a silence that, at last, feels different. Not empty, but resolved.